Hello everybody and welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about the cardiac cycle phases and their effect on the heart, atrial pressure, how they're recorded on the ECG, and if they produce any heart sounds. For the third cardiac cycle phase that we're going to be talking about is the rapid ejection. The heart is affected by the semi-lunar, which are the aortic and pulmonary valves, which open at the beginning of this phase. For the pressure and volumes of the rapid ejection, while the ventricles continue contracting, the pressure in the ventricles, which are in red color, exceeds the pressure in the aorta and the pulmonary arteries, which are in green. The semi-lunar valves open, which makes the blood exit the ventricles, and the volume in the ventricles decreases rapidly, which is in white color. As more blood enters the arteries, the pressure there builds until the flow of the blood reaches a peak. The C wave of the atrial pressure is not normally discernible in the jugular venous pulse. The right ventricle contraction pushes the tricuspid valve into the atrium and increases the atrial pressure, creating a small wave into the jugular vein. It is normally simultaneous with the carotid pulse. For the fourth phase of the cardiac cycle, which is the reduced ejection, which is the end of the diastole. For the heart, in the end of this phase, the semi-lunar, the aortic and pulmonary valves close. Their effect on the pressure and volume: after the peak in ventricular and arterial pressures, which are in red and green color in the graph, the blood flow out of the ventricles decreases and the ventricle volume decreases more slowly, which is in white color in the graph. When the pressure in the ventricle falls below the pressure in the arteries, blood in the arteries begins to flow back toward the ventricles, causing the semi-lunar valves to close. This marks the end of the ventricle systole mechanically. For the ECG, the T wave is due to the ventricle repolarization. The end of the T wave marks the end of the ventricular systole electrically. For the fifth phase we're talking about in the cardiac cycle is the isovolumetric relaxation. The beginning of the diastole, it's also called the beginning of the diastole. For the heart, at the beginning of this phase, the atrioventricular valves are closed. For the pressures and the volumes of the isovolumetric relaxation, throughout this and the previous two phases, the atrium is in diastole, being filled with blood on top of the closed atrioventricular valve, causing the atrial pressure to rise gradually, which is in yellow color in the graph. The V wave, which is due to the backflow of the blood after it hits the closed atrioventricular valves. It is the second discernible wave of the jugular venous pulse. The pressure in the ventricles, which is in red, continues to drop. The ventricular volume, which is in white, is at minimum and is ready to be filled again with blood. For the heart sounds of the isovolumetric relaxation, it produces the second heart sound, which is the dop sound, which occurs when the semi-lunar valves, which are the aortic and the pulmonary valves, close. The S2, which is the sound 2, is normally split because of the aortic valve closes slightly earlier than the pulmonary valve. For the sixth phase that we're talking about in the cardiac cycle, which is the rapid ventricular filling. Once the atrioventricular valves open, blood that has been accumulated in the atriums flow rapidly into the ventricles. For the pressures and the volumes of the rapid ventricular filling, the ventricular volume, which is in white in the graph, increases rapidly as blood flows from the atriums into the ventricles. For the heart sounds, the rapid ventricular filling forms the third heart sound, which is the S3, and is usually abnormal and is due to rapid passive ventricular filling. It occurs in dilated congestive heart failure, myocardial infarction, or mitral incompetence. It can also be heard in individuals with thin abdominal wall. And finally, with the last phase, which is the seventh phase in the cardiac cycle, which is the reduced ventricular filling, which is the diastasis. It produces pressures and volume, which is the ventricular volume, which is in white color, which increases more slowly now. The ventricles continue to fill with blood until they are nearly full. So this was everything for today's video. Thank you very much and hope to see you soon again in the next video.